Welcome to the Avram Theater. I am Margarita Espada, founder and artistic director of Teotro Experimental Yerbabruja. The NAA Big Read program broadened our understanding of our world, our neighbors, ourselves, through the power of the shared reading experience. We chose U.S. poet Laureate Harjo's and American songwriters because it offered us the opportunity to open the conversation about our history of our brown, Black, and indigenous communities on Long Island, and to include them in a discussion on issues of oppression, our differences and similarities, the power of nature and the nature's power, memory, and our conception and search for physical and spiritual home. Harjo's reflection on identity, home, homelessness, and belonging has been really the catalyst for discussion and exploration in a higher diverse community on Long Island. We are happy to welcome Joy Harjo to share her poetry with us tonight. We want to thank the National Endowment for the Art Big Read Program, the Bayshore School Art Endowment Fund, the Bayshore High School Ethnic Pen, Fidelis Care, the Stony University Department of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies, Humanities Institute, the MFA Creative Writing Program, English Department, and Latin American and Caribbean Studies. Thank you, committee partners, and my board of directors for the financial and in-kind support that made this program possible. And now, please welcome Denise Silva-Dennis, representing the Shenandoah Nation.
Akwe, in our language, means hello. Mintampak, friends. Denise Kwa Widamo, Natusuwis, Silva Dennis, Mitrapayawunk, Shinnikap Kwa Hassan and Nisko Nip Monk. Shinnikap Nitap is where I live, and I just told you where I'm from in our ancient language. I wanted to, on the behalf of the Shinnikap Nation, as a member of the General Council, and what I sometimes call myself is an MCOT, which means mother of one of the Council of Trustees members. I want to welcome you, and it's been such a pleasure working with you, Margarita Espada, and Segundo, and your family, and also Kathy Barbash, and the rest of the Teotro Yerbabruja Firehouse Gallery. This is a collaboration that will be going on as long as we live and maybe beyond in this world. I want to also acknowledge the leadership of our nation. If our nation leaders are here tonight, and they intended to be, if you're here, there's Brian Polite, Vice Chairman Randy King, Secretary to the Council Kelly Dennis, Secretary to the General Council Jermaine Smith, Treasurer Seneca Bowen, and Sunkwa Linda Franklin. No one can really organize this type of event all by themselves. So I also want to take the time to acknowledge the planning group and welcoming group that I've been working with. And I hope that the General Council and the Council, you can just raise your hands, and the people who have been helping us plan, sometimes on Zoom, and we did it, through COVID. And at one time, you were able to come over to the house, but then after that, it just took dedication to work together to see this dream realized of having Joy Harjo come here to visit us and to speak with us. I want to also deliver a land acknowledgement, and I want to acknowledge that it was a cousin who wrote this on behalf of all of us, and it's Holly Hale Thompson. And by the way, everyone who worked together are members of the Shinnecock Nation and some other nations as well. We'll work together and get those bonds together. Makwantash iyeyon ko siko, you remember us thou, me as unto our sacred hills, which is Shinnecock Hills. Hakame in our Shinnecock language is one of those words that's used even as our own language has been banned It's our word for welcome. There's a lesson to be appreciated by the fact that mainly that our Shinnecock people often say Hakame regularly to our relatives daily in thanksgiving to the water, the air, the soil, fish, animals, plants, trees, the four-legged, the winged ones at the hand of the Creator. We're gathered in our sacred Shinnecock Hills tonight. I welcome you tonight to the Shinnecock land. Our people live freely in the Shinnecock Hills, right where this college is, right where this auditorium is, until 1859, the time when my own generation's great-great-grandparents were just children. And just because the Long Island Railroad, Southampton town, the movers, the shakers and takers, including the likes of Samuel Parrish, forced my people to be relegated to the neck of Shinnecock, that could neither sever nor remove these sacred hills from us, or dismiss us from them. Maps, deeds, titles, boundary lines, treaties, edicts come and go. But you know what? The indigenous people and the land to which we belong is forever and ever and ever. Oh. You probably see a lot of us on the highway with our banners trying to protect our land all the time. And you beep, and we have so many allies. Land acknowledgement to open a meeting is not to remind Native people that this is our land. Land acknowledgement is to remind our non-Native neighbors that this is our land, and to remind them that this remains our land, regardless of who might be playing golf, who might be building mansions or hospitals, all of whom desecrate burials in our unceded and sacred Shinnecock space. So that was our land acknowledgement. And at this time, I want to bring out Joy Harjo to come, the esteemed Joy Harjo, and it's just, such an inspiration, reading The American Sunrise and sharing her poetry. It's just such an honor to have her here among us, the first United States Poet Laureate, who happens to be Native American from the Muskogee Creek Nation. There's so many things between our nation and her nation that are very similar. But one of the things that really strikes is that her people were moved from Alabama thousands and thousands and thousands of miles into Oklahoma, whereas our people were moved from our ancestral land to still our ancestral land on Shinnecock Neck. But it was to separate us from our most sacred burial grounds, which is in the Shinnecock Hills. And well, at least we have our Shinnecock sugarloaf now. Thank you for everybody who's been behind us for that. And we hope to have many, many more pieces to protect our Shinnecock Hills and land back, right? Land back. Yes. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be having Joy come on out in a moment. Here she is. Also, thank you. We're also going to call on the drummers to come out. And come on up from, if you're in the audience, please. Our drummers here tonight are Wayne Duncan, Charles Cause, Johnny Smith, Deshaun Cause, Gideon Benson, Shane Weeks, Justin, Lance Guns. Who else do we have over here? Lynn? Viola. Is that everybody? I don't want to miss anyone. Thank you all for being here. They're going to be doing the honor song tonight. to honor Joy's visit here and sharing her poetry. And I ask if you are able to, please rise.
Madel, thank you. It is an honor to be welcomed into a community. In that honor to be welcomed by the traditional community. Joy Harjo Chia Chifkara, so Yerbabruja, Amaro Laudos, Kachogi, Amalegerados, Tulsa, Taloha, Legados. Joy Harjo, member of Hickory Ground, Ceremonial Ground, Kacha Clan, and I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, or the Muskogee Creek Nation Reservation. And I'm happy to be here with you. I've been traveling a lot lately, all over. I guess what happened is there was so much backed up from COVID, and now everyone wants to be out in public. And even though it's still a little dicey, so now I'm traveling a lot because everything was postponed till, I think, this week. So I'm here. I think so every community, this whole country is really is Indian country, and there are keepers of the lands. There are altars in these lands. There are places that the indigenous people have always taken care of and still take care of unless they've been forcibly removed from those places. But it doesn't, the altars remained, and it's, we are still charged, every human being is charged with being a keeper of this earth. Because essentially we are the earth. We are not separate from the earth. So I like to start out with a song to acknowledge the original peoples here and to say, Meadow, thank you for welcoming me. And it's also a prayer that your communities and the people do well and find their way in these very challenging times that we're all in together as the earth. So I asked my cousin, Joe Sulphur, he's kind of an encyclopedia of music for Hickory Ground and for for our Muskogee Creek people. He knows so many songs. And I said, I need a song that I can sing when I go places, because so many of our songs belong in a certain place, and they're not supposed to be really taken out of that place. And so he said, well, here, I'll teach you this one. And it's called Ale Nale No, and it's a welcoming song, but it basically says we were brought here by the old ones, and here we are in this place together, and we might as well have a good time and dance, and it was foretold, and so I'm going to sing it because I'm happy to be here. Ale Nale No, Ale Nale No, Ale Nale No, Ale Nale No, Iflini Tukale, Alena, 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 ho bunny, Alena, 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 Ajalugi Magongi, Alena, Alena, Heyongi Gali. So this poem is called For Calling the Spirit Back from Wandering the Earth in Its Human Feet. And this is a poem, I wrote it because sometimes we get lost on the way and we lose parts of ourselves. We come up through our communities and families and in our generations. Each generation makes a kind of person, and sometimes in the struggle we lose parts of ourselves. And we start even to grieve, and we may not know even what we're grieving for, but we all carry so much, so many contradictions, historical trauma, and right now we're going through so much, in a country, on the planet Earth, with climate change and pandemic roaming the world, and injustice roaming the world, and this racial hatred, and being fueled by people who are supposed to be in positions of leadership. And I thought leadership, even in the name leadership, meant that you were to provide a pathway of beauty and common sense. And so we've been going through a lot, political divisiveness. So this poem is to help us come back together. Each person coming back as together as a whole person, and even the nation needs to come back as a whole person. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Turn off that cell phone, computer, remote control. Open the door and close it behind you. Take a breath offered by friendly winds. They travel the earth gathering essences of plants to clean. Give it back with gratitude. If you sing, it will give your spirit lift to fly to the stars' ears and back. Acknowledge this earth who has cared for you since you were a dream, planting itself precisely within your parents' desire. Let your moccasin feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, birds, and animal people who accompany you. Ask their forgiveness for the harm we humans have brought down upon them. Don't worry. The heart knows the way. Though there may be high-rises, interstates, checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100, 1,000, or even more. Watch your mind. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by thieves of time. Do not hold regrets. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of your soul, you will be welcomed. You must clean yourself with cedar, sage, or other healing plant. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let go of the pain you are holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet. Let go of the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are coming in our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. Call your spirit back. It may be caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. You must call in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as you would a beloved child. Welcome your spirit back from its wandering. It may return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep a while after it is bathed and given clean clothes. Now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep room for those who have no place to go. Make a giveaway. And remember, keep the speeches short. Then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark. So this poem is called Rabbit is Up to Tricks. And Rabbit is a trickster figure in our Muskogee tradition and a lot of the West African traditions also. So Rabbit always shows us our human foibles and often, every culture has tricksters, clowns, and they are often near the seat of power. We need them near the seat of power because they remind those who are holding power that the power doesn't belong to them, that it was given to them to share. And every person comes into this world with a gift, or even you might even want to call it a power, something that was given to them. And it is able to blossom. It blossoms when you share it. You develop it and share it. But sometimes, in very strange times, the trickster winds up sitting in the seat of power. I'm not going to name names. I was told as poet laureate that I have to behave. My laureateship ends the last Friday of this month. Rabbit is up to tricks. In a world long before this one, there was enough for everyone until somebody got out of line. We heard it was Rabbit, fooling around with clay in the wind. Everybody was tired of his tricks and no one would play with him, and he was lonely in this world. So Rabbit thought to make a person, and when he blew into the mouth of that crude figure to see what would happen, the clay man stood up. Rabbit showed the clay man how to steal a chicken. The clay man obeyed. Then he showed him how to steal corn. The clay man obeyed. Then he showed him how to steal someone else's wife. Well, that clay man obeyed. Rabbit felt important and powerful, and clay man felt important and powerful. And once that clay man started, he could not stop. Once he took that chicken, he wanted all the chickens. Once he took that corn, he wanted all the corn. And once he took that wife, well, he wanted all the wives. He was insatiable. Then he had a taste of gold. He wanted all the gold. Soon it was land or anything else he saw. His wanting only made him want more. Soon it was countries. Then it was trade. The wanting infected the earth. We lost track of the purpose and meaning of life. We began to forget our songs, our stories. We could no longer see or hear our ancestors or talk with each other across the kitchen table. Forests were being mowed down all over the world to make more. And Rabbit had no place left to play. Rabbit's trick had backfired. Rabbit tried to call that clay man back, but when the clay man wouldn't listen, Rabbit realized he made a clay man with no ears. So I think a lot of you have been reading An American Sunrise, so I better read some poems out of here. This book started, I did not have plans to write a book of poetry right away. I was working on the anthology of native poetry with a team of all the experts were native poets. You see, when the light of the world was subdued, our songs came through a Norton anthology of Native Nations poetry. And I was working on other projects. And at that, I was living, and we went to, my husband, who's also on Muskogee Creek, we went to, I accepted a job at UTK, University of Tennessee, Knoxville, because we would be in our homeland area, and we went all over that area down. We had a strong family ties down in the Columbus, Georgia area. And we were driving around with this historian. He said, that's Patty Carr's, one of Patty Carr's houses. And Patty Carr was a great uncle of mine who had the largest horse racing establishment on the eastern seaboard before removal. And yeah, think about that when you think about Indian removal, because we have, I think with history, we flatline so much history, flatline images of natives, flatline images of people at the border. There's so much of this flatlining, and you don't see that people are human beings. And so we've been going around to these places, and what do you do with that? I mean, here we were excited about going back home. We think, okay, we're going to do one more semester here, and we miss home because we were removed, and our tribal nation is in northeastern Oklahoma. And I'm thinking, what do I do with that contradiction? Our people we fought Andrew Jackson, we fought so hard against removal, and came back into these beautiful lands, and we could feel the story roots were there. I mean, I went to where you had heard about the tie snake, and there's where the tie snake's house in the Chattahoochee River. All these story roots. But then the people aren't there. And then we're excited about going back, and what do you do with that? Because they fought so hard. And that's when I went outside and looked at it through the trees, and my spirit asked me, what did you learn here? So this is the poem that really started the book, How to Write a Poem in a Time of War. There's a couple of voices here, and I was thinking about that, all the history there and how people had been force-walked and, pushed out of their homes by gunpoint. I've read a lot of those reports where the soldiers would come in, and then the settler families would be sitting right there, and then as soon as they were pushed out by gunpoint, would go in and take over the houses. I'm sure they took over the racetrack. That's something else I need to research. What happened to that racetrack? I'm just curious. And then go back and claim it and reopen it. So I was writing this, and Syria, the human beings, the people were being bombed, and I remember an image that haunted me of twin baby girls, a father holding and grieving over his twin baby girls. And so that's in here so that I don't forget them. And so the poem winds up someplace. It taught me something. I go forth in a poem not knowing where I'm going to go. And when I got to the end, I thought, wow, I didn't know. This makes sense that this is what happened. How to write a poem in a time of war. You can't begin just anywhere. It's a wreck. Shrapnel in the eye of a house, a row of houses. There's a rat scrambling from light with fleshy trash in its mouth. A baby strapped to its mother's back cut loose. Soldiers crawl the city, the river, the town, the village, the bedroom, our kitchen. They eat everything or burn it. They kill what they cannot take. They rape what they cannot kill. They take. Rumors fall like rain, like bombs, like mother and father tears swallowed for restless peace. Like sunset slanting toward a moonless midnight. Like a train blown free of its destination. Like a seed fallen where There is no chance of trees or any place for birds to live. No, start here. Deer peer from the edge of the woods. We used to see woodpeckers the size of the sun and were greeted by chickadees with their good morning songs. Wheat started to cook outside, slippery with dew and laughter. These smoky, sweet sunrises. We tried to pretend war wasn't going to happen, though they began building their houses all around us and demanding more. They started teaching our children their God's story. No, not here. You can't begin here. This is memory shredded because it is impossible to hold with words, even poetry. These memories were left here with the trees, the torn pocket of your daughter's hand-sewn dress, the sash, the lace, the baby's delicately beaded moccasin still connected to her foot, a young man's note of promise to his beloved. No, this is not the best place to begin. Everyone was asleep, despite the distant bombs. Terror had become the familiar stranger. Our beloved twin girls curled up in their nightgowns next to their father and me. If we begin here, none of us will make it to the end of the poem. Someone has to make it out alive, sang a grandfather to his grandson, his granddaughter, as he blew his most powerful song into the hearts of the children. There, it would be hidden from the soldiers who would take them miles, rivers, and mountains from the naval cord place of the origin story. He knew one day, far day, the grandchildren would return, generations later, over slick highways constructed over old trails, through walls of laws meant to hamper or destroy, over stones bearing libraries of the winds. He sang us back to our home place from which we were stolen, in these smoky green hills. Yes, begin here. Here's a little poem, A Refuge in the Smallest of Places. And I've been wondering what's going on at the border. I haven't heard anything. It's kind of been submerged in the news about, are they still putting those children in those cages and what happened to them. And so this poem is for those who are fleeing on those ancient migration trails north for home. Someone sang for me and no one else could hear it. When I had given up and made knife marks on my arm or drank and gave myself away or was given. Someone sang for me and no one else could hear it. When demons came with ropes and cages to take my children from me and imprison us. Someone sang for me and no one else could hear it. Now I am here in this timeless room of poetry, gathering up the destroyed and the forgotten, because of the song someone sang that no one else could hear but me. There's a little story, it's one of my favorite stories, and I put it here in my memoir, Poet Warrior. And it's not on the page that I wrote down. So I'll think of things to say while I look for it. But, for years, very popular images, I found it, of Native people show us disappearing. That was a really famous, trope, or is that, everybody's disappearing and will be gone. And yet, that's not what happened, no matter relocation or any of the other government programs meant to diminish or destroy us. But I love this story about how songs were held by another tribal nation for a people. And I remember reading about, I worked with Sven Hawkinson for some time. He's a Supiak, or Lutik. I guess their real name is Supiak. I knew him as Lutik. and an anthropologist from Kodiak Island area, who, as his study, he worked to help bring people his culture back. And I remember him talking about even going up into some of the Siberian villages that were still in there. They still had their culture almost intact, and living with them and learning from them. And due to his efforts and the efforts of many, they went from their culture was revitalized. We can call culture back. I'm reminded of a Sukpiaq story told to me by a Sukpiaq anthropologist, Sven Hawkinson, who specializes in documenting and preserving the culture and language of his people. Years ago, as he was coming up, the people were in crisis. Their culture was nearly gone. There were no new native speakers being taught and fewer culture bearers. The people began taking their language and cultural knowledge back, sometimes one piece, one word at a time. They soon discovered that it had always been there, hidden. It hadn't died, rather it existed silently as a living being in collections scattered across the world. It was lonely, and like all living beings, once reawakened, it began to thrive with attention and nurturing. Years before, during the worst of it, Russian fur traders lined up Sukpiaq people and shot musket balls through them to see how many people could be killed with one shot. When the children were torn from their parents' arms and held as hostages, one Tlingit man who loved a Sukpiaq woman learned their songs and taught them to singers from his village, keeping the songs alive, to be gifted back when they would emerge from the destruction. Recently, the Sukpiaq songs were returned home by the Tlingit. There were many tears that day as the Tlingit people sang the songs back to the Sukpiaq people nearly a century later, as the Sukpiaq received the songs that they thought were gone. The songs never died. They were living within the Tlingit nation because of love, waiting to be gifted back to the Sukpiaq nation to sing again. I'm going to read a new poem. I don't really want it recorded yet. It's brand new. I read it for the first time this morning. I wrote it in my hotel room with the rain and the wind and everything, and it surprised me because, of course, I was reading the New York Times, and there was an image taken in a town in, I don't want to say the name wrong, in Ukraine. There was a loaf of bread on a bench, and 2 people had been killed by mortar who'd been sitting on that bench. But this place, it could be happen in any war. This could be a couple, this could be a father and a daughter, sitting there in any of our native nations in wars all over the world. An ordinary morning. We left for the park a little later than usual, my old father and me, though we knew the war was on us. Blood hunger has an endless stomach. I wanted to keep the morning from its mouth. He needed his walk to soften his joints, and we had a daily appointment with the birds. New green was peeking from the winter earth. The birds who had not scattered to the forests after the first detonations kept to their early spring rituals. Like us, they were beginning to sing their spring songs and were making new ones. We could not let war steal everything. In the park, my old father, hobbled by an older war, by worries over the evil let loose among us, found joy in watching the children feeding the birds and telling the stories he never tired of. And we who loved him, well, those old stories made a circle of knowledge and affection. We bought a loaf of bread. The baker stayed on to help keep the ritual of our lives fastened into place. Our genealogies of bones are stacked in the graveyard and live in the stories we shared this morning, the baker and us. We will go on, even if there is only one standing in a sea of blood and loss, one who will tell the story of who we were and how we fought for an ordinary morning like this one, when the earth was beginning to awake from its cold season. Old Father, you tore off a piece of bread for the birds gathered at your feet. They knew to find us here, this park bench, this prayer of blessing for the continuum of living. The fire took you first, O Father. I was stunned. The sun exploded. Then I was gone, following you, the way I always did, first with my eyes, then when I learned to toddle. A bird with breadcrumbs in its beak fled to the top of the closest standing tree. My mother, your wife, was a girl again. Then you left the wedding feast as you walked hand in hand to begin a story. I was a thought in the shape of a spring flower emerging through a blood-soaked earth. How we lived and lived and lived and loved our living. We did not want to let it go. I didn't plan to write that poem.
Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah. It had been building up. That's what we poets do. I mean, what do any of us do with all these stories? I mean, you think about it, it wasn't always like this. I mean, yes, we live in a global existence. But what do you do with this constant stream of so many, of suffering all over the world? And what do we do with it? We have to find a way. We become witness to whatever we see or we hear. And we all have to find a way so that we're not carrying something that will destroy us, but rather I go to poetry, I go to the earth, I go to loved ones, and we just have to know that we're all in a part of the story that needs every one of us. This is I shouldn't say favorite poem, but it's one of my favorites in An American Sunrise. And if my husband were here after I read this, if my husband were here, then the audience would come up after to look at his feet. So, it's called My Man's Feet. But it's kind of an ode, but it's a love poem, but it's also a poem about layers of history that we walk through every day. And I wrote it when we were there, thinking about certainly walking on the Trail of Tears, but all of these layers of history. My Man's Feet. They are heroic roots. You cannot mistake them for any other 6-foot walker. I could find them in a sea of feet, a planet or universe of feet. They kicked the sky at birth in the town his great-grandfather found. My man's feet left childhood past the mineral grit of an oil flesh bust to these atomic eastbound lands. His feet are made of his mother's spiritual concern and of his father, historic and mindfully upright. What walkers, from mound builder steps that led to the sky maker, past Spanish galleon, stagecoach, and railroad snaker. One generation following another. No other feet but these could bear the rock-stubborn, loyal bear, towering intelligence, and children picker-upper. That is the one who owns these feet. What an anchor his feet provide for his unmatched immensibility and get-up-againality. I danced behind this man in the stomp dance circle, our feet beating rhythm together, man, woman, boy, girl, sun, and moon jumper. My man's feet are the sure steps of a father looking after his sons, his daughters. For when he laughs, he opens all the doors of our hearts, even as he forgets to shut them when he leaves. And when he grieves for those he loves, he carves out valleys enough to hold everyone's tears with his feet, these feet, my man's widely humble, ever steady, beautiful, brown feet. Let's see, it seems like I just got started and it seems like it's already 8:09. I'll read some more, I'll read a few more. My watch is wrong? Okay. Okay. Oh, let's see. I'm going to read, I might cut parts of it out, so don't be alarmed if you've read this poem and you think, why did she not? It's a long poem, Washing My Mother's Body, but I've had a few requests for this poem. Yes. Is that Brianna? It's for Brianna. So, here I was riding along doing these poems based on my father's side of the family, and here comes this poem. I didn't expect to write this poem either, and but you know how things build up in you, and it had always bothered me that I didn't get to wash my mother's body. I was with her the last months of her lung cancer, and she never looked like anyone who was dying. And in fact, she would always eat 2 desserts, you know. And that morning, I remember I called the hospice worker. I won't go into all this story, but I realized from that moment on, I began my role of midwifing her to the other side. And I remember when the hospice worker came in and looked at her and said, "Oh, she doesn't look like she's going to die." She didn't say that, though. That would be, she just said, maybe she just caught something, and within half hour she was gone with all of us around her. So it was a beautiful death. And, but immediately, you know, my sister called the funeral home. I wasn't in there. I was in there with my mother, kind of singing and talking to her spirit and her body, sitting with her, kind of sitting sentry with her body. And I decided I'm going to wash my mother's body. And then next thing I know, here are these men in suits, which is unusual. We don't usually see men in suits in our home. And here are these men in suits coming to take her. Strangers. To me, that struck me as like, wait a minute. This is one of the most sacred moments. This is our mother. This is, in those moments, like childbirth, there is a door that opens wide, and it's a door to sacredness. And so it's important to keep that. It's helpful if we think good thoughts and we are helpful. So I decided not to make a fight. First I was upset, and I thought, no, I'll let her go. But it made me think about what we do at these moments. We hand our beloved ones over to strangers instead of taking care of some of these things on our own. And it bothered me, and so I put it somewhere and went on, and then I realized through writing this poem, and this is for you too, that sometimes there are people that there's no way you can talk to them. They might still be living, and they're kind of dead to you because you've reached an impasse, but sometimes you can sit and write. You can write it as a poem, you can write it as a story, a letter, but you can talk to them that way. Maybe there's, somebody that's gone on and you weren't able to be there and you feel guilty, or for some other reason they will still hear you. You can write a poem, you can talk to them, you can sing to them. And I learned that writing this poem. I never got to wash my mother's body when she died. I returned to take care of her in memory. That's how I make peace when things are left undone. I go back and open the door. I step in to make my ritual, to do what should have been done, what needs to be fixed so that my spirit can move on, so that the children and grandchildren are not caught in a knot of regret they do not understand. I find the white enamel pan she used for bread and biscuits. It's the same pan she used to bathe us when we were babies. I turn the faucet on and hold my hand under the water until it is warm, the temperature one uses to wash an infant. I find a clean washcloth in a stack of washcloths. She had nothing in her childhood. She made sure she had plenty of everything when she grew up and made her own life. Her closets were full of pretty dresses, so many she had not the time to wear them all. They were bought by the young girl who wore the same flower sack dress to school every day, the one she had to wash out every night and hang up to dry near the wood stove. I pick up the bar of soap from her sink, the same soap she used yesterday morning to wash her face. When she looked in the mirror, did she know it would be her last sunrise? I move over pill bottles, a clock radio on the table by the bed, a pen, and set down the pen. I straighten the blankets over her to keep her warm for dignity. I start with her face. Her face is unlined even 2 months before her 80th birthday. She was known for her beauty. As I wash my mother's face, I tell her how beautiful she is, how brave, and how her beauty and bravery live on in her grandchildren. Her face is relaxed, peaceful. Her earth memory body has not left yet. But when I see her the next day embalmed and in the casket in the funeral home, it will be gone. Where does it go? It is heavier than the spirit who lifted up and flew. I think of it making the rounds to every place it has loved to say goodbye. Goodbye to the house where I brought my babies home, she sings. Goodbye to June's bar where I was the shuffleboard queen. I cannot say goodbye yet. I will never say goodbye. I lift up each arm to wash. Her hands still wear her favorite rings. She loved her body and decorated it with shiny jewelry, with creams and makeup. I am tender over the burn scar on her arm from when she cooked at the place with the cruel boss who insisted she reach her hand into the fryolator to clean it. She had protested it was still hot and suffered a deep burn. That scar always reminded me of her coming in from working long hours in restaurants, her uniform drenched with sweat, determination, and exhaustion. Once she came home and I was burning up with a fever. She pulled out the same pan I am dipping the washcloth in now, only she's added rubbing alcohol to bring the fever down. She washes tenderly, tells me about how her friend Chunky left her husband again, how she knows her old boss, a Jewish woman who treated her kindly, has cancer. She doesn't know how she knows. She just knows. She doesn't tell me that. I find it in a journal she has left me, a date book in which she has written notes for me to find when she is gone. I wash her neck and lift the blankets to move down her heart. I thank her body for carrying us through the tough story, through the violence of my father and her second husband. The story is all there in her body. As I wash her to prepare her to be let down into earth and return all stories to the earth. My body memories rise up as I wash. I recall carrying my 2 children, rocking them and feeding them from my body, how I knew myself as beloved earth in that body. I uncover my mother's legs. I remember the varicose veins that swelled like rivers when my mother would get off a long shift of standing and cooking. They carried more than a woman should carry. A woman should be treated like a queen. Traditionally, we treated our women with that kind of respect, my Creek husband tells me. Ha, I laugh and ask him, then why aren't you cooking my dinner? I wash her feet, caress them. You will have some rest now, I tell my mother, even as I know my mother was never one for resting. I cover her. I make the final ring of the washcloth and drape it over the pan. I brush my mother's hair and kiss her forehead. I ask the keepers of the journey to make sure her travel is safe and sure. I ask the angels with whom she loved and with whom she spoke frequently to take her home. But wait, not before I find her favorite perfume. Then I sing her favorite song softly. I don't know the name of the song. Just a few phrases. One of those old homemade heartbreak songs where there's a moment of happiness wound through, and then I let her go. I'll read a few more pieces and then I guess I'll close it out. Let's see. I'm going to read a story. I have 2 books coming out this fall. One is, I realized that 2022 marks 50 years since I published my first poems. And so I have a book called Weaving Sundown in a Scarlet Light with 50 poems from these 50 years that Norton will bring out. And then I have a book called Catching the Light, being brought out by Yale University Press. And it was, I was asked to give for this, I guess, Wyndham Campbell Awards, was asked to give the speech, what is it, the keynote, the address. And I guess the deal is you give a long address, it was very long, and then you write a book. Well, I decided to write the book first. But I wrote it in 50 vignettes, and I did it while I was traveling. And this is one of the vignettes. And I'm going to read it because I was given this beautiful gift, and it's this buffalo here. But, so it's just a little vignette. It's about writing. It's for their series, Why I Write series. So this is looking about, just musing kind of a vignette. White buffalo calf woman appeared to the Lakota at a time when they needed inspiration for right living. John Fire Langdeer wrote in his 1972 autobiography, Seeker of Visions, the life of a Sioux medicine man, that in those times they knew nothing. The buffalo woman put her sacred mind into their minds. She appeared to be Lakota in both a human form as a beautiful woman and as a buffalo. She brought them to the sacred pipe, corn, wasna, or pemmican, and wild turnip, and she taught the people many things, showed them the right way to live. When she disappeared, she said she would return every generation cycle. I visited the white buffalo born in Janesville, Wisconsin on August 20th, 1994. The birth was understood by many as the return, as promised, of white buffalo calf woman. Shortly after the birth, on September 13th, Arvo Lickinghorse, caretaker of the white buffalo calf woman pipe, was quoted in the Beloit Daily News as saying while he prepared for a ceremony at the Janesville farm, "The prophecies are being fulfilled. We are starting to see a coming together of people going back to the natural ways." There are always signs. When I lived in northern New Mexico, the story traveled the community that the face of Jesus had appeared in a tortilla. It was considered a miracle, and parishioners came from all over New Mexico, even as far as Mexico, to witness the miracle, to be blessed by it. Many miracle cures were attributed to visits to the burned tortilla altar. Perhaps a poem is a sign made manifest. Certainly they can be miracles. Ask any poet. A miracle occurred once in an Indian bar in Milwaukee. It was told to me one night as I sat in that bar. This is when I was younger. It was told to me one night as I sat in that bar with the locals, all of us tipping back our drinks with youthful bravado. It had begun snowing. A blizzard was predicted. The way it was told to me was that it was a night just like this one, in the middle of the week, no payday in sight, just the regulars. The door opened and a mysterious young Indian woman in a red dress suddenly appeared. The wind blew the door shut, a snowdrift formed, and she walked through to the counter to order a drink. No one knew her. She didn't look like she belonged to the local Indian families, but she was definitely Indian. Her beauty gleamed and her startling red dress spun and shone in the yellow lights of the bar. The regulars elbowed one another, daring each other to be the first to ask her name, to find out where she came from and who her family was. The women bunched up as they eyed their competition. She ordered another drink and walked to the jukebox and punched in a few songs with a quarter. She stood there with a drink until her picked song began its wail. It was a popular country western tune by Kenny Rogers, not the usual worn-out rock of the regular crowd. Then, this was the miracle. She stood on a chair and climbed up on a table in front of the music. She danced, and as she swayed, she took off her clothes. First her thin coat, not warm enough for a Wisconsin winter, then her shoes, her dress, and everything. She danced as Rogers sang how his beloved Lucille left him with 4 hungry children and a crop in the field. No one could believe the vision. This was a crowd that had seen everything. Their land stolen, starvation, massacres, children taken away, and returned shorn of memory. Everything. They were all shocked by the miracle. When the song was over, the spell was shattered. The red-dressed woman was naked and shivering. An older woman who would otherwise have been home watching her grandchildren helped her get dressed. All the men ran over to the jukebox, fed it with quarters, and punched that song for replay. I always wondered what happened to her after her dance on the sticky worn table in the bar on a night when the bar was the only place open for miles around, when no flights were coming in and out and the power lines had all fallen. Did she make it home? How did anyone make it home? Did she make it to where she was going? Did someone lend a hand, or was she ambushed? I have kept a place in my heart for her all these years. In that place she shines and spins because she was nourished. Her children are returned to her because she went through rehab. Her family stopped drinking, came together as they practiced ceremonies they had walked away from after they were deemed evil by those earliest Indian schools and churches. When I remember her, I see tall stands of pine trees around a clear, deep lake. It is early in the morning and the sun is casting flickers of light through the trees. I can hear her singing. So I guess I will close with this one called Remember. And thank you for the water. And this was one of my earlier poems, and it came about because I'd been writing in the community. As my first my writing community I was a member of the Kiva Club, which was the Native Student Club at the University of New Mexico, and I was on my way. I was studying art. My grandmother was a painter. My aunt, her sister was a painter, and that's what I was going to do. And I started hearing Native poets for the first time, and that blew me away. It's like, because I always loved poetry. I came to poetry through my mother's music, actually, and she would recite poems by William Blake, but I became part of this. It blew it open when I realized that, wow, you can write a poem. You don't have to be from an old man from England to write poetry. Not really, I said what I thought poets were. And because we didn't have poetry at career day, you know? And, but it was, it was amazing. Wow. And so I started writing poems. I didn't know where it was going to take me, but I began to know without really understanding why that was my path. And somebody asked me, and I'm still an undergrad student, to write a poem about what would I tell other poets coming up, especially young Native poets. So I will conclude with Remember. And then I guess we have Q&A. Remember the sky you were born under. Know each of the stars' stories. Remember the moon, know who she is. Remember the sun's birth at dawn, that is the strongest point of time. Remember sundown and the giving away tonight. Remember your birth, how your mother struggled to give you form and breath, your evidence of her life and her mother's and hers. Remember your father, he is your life also. Remember the earth whose skin you are, red earth, black earth, yellow earth, white earth, brown earth, we are earth. Remember the plants, trees, animal life, who all have their tribes, their families, their histories too. Talk with them, listen to them. They are alive poems. Remember the wind, remember her voice. She knows the origin of this universe. Remember you are all people and all people are you. Remember you are this universe and this universe is you. Remember that all is in motion, is growing is you. Remember the dance that language is, that life is. Remember, remember.
Thank you, everyone. We have time for maybe 1, 2, or 3 questions. There's a mic here in the front. Who want to go first?
Happy to go first. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. It's not the first time I have experienced you live, and I'm so happy it wasn't the last. I would like to know, when did you first recite a poem or share poetry in public or in school or whatever it was?
The question is, when did I first recite poetry? It was called as an undergraduate at the University of New Mexico. And I was invited to somebody's class, and this is how I did it. And it was shaking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
When we were talking earlier, I know that your National Laureate time is soon coming to an end, and you thought perhaps you'd return to do some painting, and I was just wondering if you have any thoughts or certain poems that might inspire you to make some paintings, as I'm trying to get back into it as well.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, that's my plan. I'm doing way too much travel right now, but I do want to paint again, and I was thinking, like, I would like to paint that poem, How to Write a Poem in a Time of War. I put all those images in a painting. So I've been thinking about that. And so I've been saving big jars, and I've got I've got a studio. I was a Tulsa Artist Fellow, and I was just announced as the Bob Dylan Center Artist in Residence. That opens up in early May. It's in Tulsa. People are wondering, why is the Bob Dylan Center in Tulsa? And that's because the Woody Guthrie Center is in Tulsa, and the George Kaiser Foundation funded buying those archives, and they're funding, they also bought Dylan Song Archives, and so I will be there with, helping foster, especially in the community, growth of poetry, music, and so on. But yeah, I can't wait. I want to, I want to paint. It was rough coming out as a painter and having to learn to speak in public because, I could write a book. Maybe it's a third memoir. Is how I overcame being terrified on stage. But yeah, so that's what I'm going to paint.
Well, I think you paint with words.
Yes. True.
And you paint with words. And you,
Yes.
Harjo, I just want to say thank you so much. And so I have a question. I'm a young poet. What advice would you give to young poets who really share their life experiences and their emotions through their poems?
Okay, what's the last part? Advice to young poets
who really share their life experiences and emotions through their poems.
what advice is, okay, so are you having trouble sharing them?
I really just want any advice, actually. Just as a young poet.
Well,
I love poetry.
I think the best advice is one is to write and listen and unplug and be in the world and study, but also to don't compare yourself to anyone else. Don't try to write like you can learn from people and mentors. I have many mentors and I've read a lot and I admire certain writers, but don't try to just be yourself and be yourself and find your way and honor yourself.
Thank you.
We have time for one more question.
I was very interested in your memoir that you talked about the intersection of indigenous and African music. And this is not in jazz, and this is not something we're told a lot about in this country, of the roots of jazz as being very much influenced by indigenous music. And I wondered if you could mention about that a little bit, because it really intrigued me in your memoir.
Yes, I mean, to just think about it, Congo Square is considered sort of like the origin chord place of blues and jazz. Of course, it's all over, there's many feeder stories and so on. But Congo Square was a Muskogean village, a Homo village. There you go. I would need to say much, it's like, so there you are. What happens? Well, you see other native people. They were brought over, come over and hang out, and next thing you know, there's a market on Saturday or Sunday, and everybody's, cooking stuff to sell and making beadwork and all kinds of stuff, and they're playing music together. And that's kind of, I think that's part of it. And, if you hear Muskogean people's music, you can hear all of the elements of blues and jazz are also found in our music. So there was also, I think, a crossover that happened that went both ways, just like there's no one-way land bridge. That finally there's a scientist that's refuting it, even though we knew it all along. I mean, it's common sense, It's common sense. There's no one-way land bridge anywhere. But, yeah, so I'm working on a musical play, right? I'm supposed to be. It's overdue because I've been traveling. I've got some of the songs for it. And, but that's, once I land after all this travel, I'm artist in residence. I was artist in residence. We're moving it because I only went over there a couple of days for Theater Squared in Fayetteville, Arkansas. But I'll be getting that play up and running probably within a year or so. Thank you.
So, to conclude our program today, I want to thank every one of you for creating this beautiful community space. And this is what we do, create a sense of community. And I wanted to thank you, Joyce, for your beautiful poetry and for your humanity.
And thank Margarita, and there are many staff members, many people who were involved in putting this together and cooked some great food and sang the honor songs, and all the families and for this community. Yeah.
Remember the star you were born under. Know each of the stars.